Good morning. It's Monday, July 7th. The multi-front war in the Middle East is now 640 days old. I'm your host, Jonathan Schanzer. Hope you had a meaningful and enjoyable Independence Day weekend. Welcome back to the FDD Morning Brief. The Israelis carried out airstrikes on a series of strategic Houthi targets yesterday. The Yemeni terror group seems to be the only Iranian proxy that is still capable of posing a strategic threat to Israel right now. That's because the group has ballistic missile capabilities. Thankfully, Israel has destroyed much of the Iranian capability to produce those weapons, so over time, those Houthi attacks may slow. But it hasn't been easy for Israel to find meaningful targets in Yemen with so many other active fronts closer to home. But now that the fighting with Iran and its other proxies has slowed, Israel seems to have the bandwidth to start hunting for top leaders. Here's looking at you, Abdulmalik al-Houthi. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu touched down earlier this morning at Andrews Air Force Base just outside of Washington, D.C. Some fascinating decisions for the Israeli leader as he faces calls to end the war in Gaza. I would love to be able to predict the future here, folks, but let's be honest, I can barely predict the past. So we're going to be weighing in on that on Wednesday right here on the FDD Morning Brief. Today's guest is Colonel Richard Kemp, a former British Army commander and terrorism expert who, in the early 2000s, headed the international terrorism team at the UK government's Joint Intelligence Committee. He's also recently been on the ground in Gaza, with the 12-day war now in the rear view and global attention refocusing on Israel's fight against Hamas. He is the ideal guest to help us make sense of Gaza aid distribution, talks of a possible ceasefire, and much more. So stay tuned for that conversation in just a few minutes. Some fascinating news in the Palestinian arena this weekend. 4 sheikhs from the city of Hebron want to separate from the Palestinian Authority, establish an independent emirate, and make peace with Israel. This has been percolating for a while. The idea is to establish multiple emirates across Palestinian population centers. Given how Palestinians identify primarily with local clans, families, and tribes, this thing might just work. I first heard about this concept from Israeli academic Mordechai Kedar a decade ago. Then recently, Likud Knesset member and former Jerusalem mayor Nir Barakat embraced it. Barakat's initiative has some economic perks too. Reportedly, his plan envisions Israel admitting 1,000 workers from Hebron for a trial period, and then adding 5,000 more if everything works out. Eventually, up to 50,000 Palestinians from Hebron could work inside the state of Israel. It all sounds promising, but a few caveats. First, many Israelis will oppose Palestinian autonomy in Hebron. The city, after all, holds major significance for Jews. Second, if the plan takes off, the Emirates may ultimately want to join together in pursuit of statehood. In other words, this whole thing could take us back to the two-state paradigm, which most Israelis want to avoid, like the bubonic plague. Third, I'm still trying to figure out if these sheikhs have any pull in Hebron. But for now, this is good news. It's a rebuke of the corrupt Palestinian Authority. It's a departure from the tired two-state paradigm. And it's a sign that Israel's victories since October 7th are indeed resonating across the region. Now for your headlines. Headline 1, Hamas targeted 2 Americans over the weekend. On Saturday, 2 American personnel working for the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation were injured when Hamas terrorists hurled grenades at an aid distribution site near the southern Gaza city of Khan Yunis. GHF posted a picture of fragments from one of the grenades, which were packed with ball bearings. If you're curious about what that looks like, you can find the image on X pretty easily. Oh, and no shocker here, those grenades were Iranian-made. GHF says Hamas deliberately targeted the Americans and then courageously, after lobbing the grenade at aid workers, the terrorists ran into a crowd of Palestinian civilians. Super courageous. Thankfully, the IDF helped evacuate the Americans, who are now in stable condition. A reminder here that GHF is sacrificing life and limb to feed Palestinians and to change the corrupt aid distribution paradigm in Gaza. The organization has distributed 60+ million meals since it opened for business in May. Headline 2, Turkish authorities arrested the mayors of 3 Turkish cities. All 3 mayors belong to the Republican People's Party. CHP is Turkey's main opposition party. These arrests come 4 months after Istanbul Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu was thrown in jail on corruption charges. That arrest sends sent hundreds of thousands of Turks into the streets in protest. But the furor ultimately subsided. Sadly, Imamoglu remains in jail. A reminder here that Turkey is anything but a democracy these days. Since July 1st, Turkish authorities have arrested more than 100 officials, including current and former mayors. They're all facing corruption allegations, which is pretty rich given the corruption of Recep Tayyip Erdogan, his family, and his cronies. They have built the system in Turkey for more than 2 decades and counting. Headline 3, yesterday, the IDF and Shin Bet confirmed the elimination of a senior Hamas commander. I got to be honest here. I didn't think there was a senior Hamas commander left, but apparently they found one. His name was Ramzi Ramadan Abdali Saleh. He was the commander of Hamas's naval force in northern Gaza. According to the IDF, he was key to Hamas's maritime capabilities, and he was actively planning attacks against Israeli troops. Saleh was meeting with other Hamas operatives, including the deputy head of Hamas's mortar unit. So that's 2 leaders that were killed in one stroke. The strike that took Saleh out was a joint operation. The Israeli Air Force, Navy, military intelligence, and the Shin Bet all took part. That kind of teamwork was what made the IDF so lethal in Lebanon, and don't forget Iran too. All right, it's time to dive into that conversation with Colonel Richard Kemp. Tune in for the military knowledge. Stay for the British accent. Let's get to it, shall we? Welcome to the program, Richard Kemp.
Thank you. It's really good to be with you, Jonathan. And I always enjoy working alongside FDD, and I draw a huge amount on the excellent work that you do.
Kind of you to say. We learn a lot from you as well, and it's a pleasure to host you this morning. I want to start with how Israel is doing in Gaza. I know you were just there. I know that they're winning, but I know we've also reached a point of diminishing returns, or at least that's what it seems. And it also seems that Benjamin Netanyahu is going to come under some pressure today from Donald Trump to end the war. Are we at that point of diminishing returns?
I don't believe we are. I think the war's taken a hell of a long time, as we all know, only too well. But that's really down to 3 main reasons. I think the first one is the presence of the hostages, which obviously has meant that the IDF has had to operate far more cautiously than they otherwise would. And that's obviously important. Secondly, because of the extent of restraint that was placed on the IDF and on Israel generally by the Biden administration, which slowed things down a lot inside Gaza. And thirdly, of course, because the IDF was having to focus a lot of its military efforts on Lebanon against Hezbollah. And now that threat has not gone, but is significantly diminished. I think the IDF is able to apply more power now into Gaza. And I think it's probably, people have said this before, but I think it's probably a relatively short time before Hamas is taken out of the game. Not totally, of course, not going to kill every terrorist, but certainly sufficient damage for them to no longer present a threat to Israel. And I think it would be a bad thing if President Trump applied pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu now to stop the war and effectively to seize defeat from the jaws of victory.
Yeah, I do think, though, that at least it looks to me like Bibi is ready to, I don't know, perhaps yield to Donald Trump. Of course, Donald Trump has helped him immensely in the Iran theater. And we did see the prime minister go to the southern envelope for the first time since the war erupted and meet with families. It did get a sense that he was giving a nod to the hostage families. But I guess we'll have to wait and see. The prime minister arrived at Blair House this morning across the street from the White House, and will be taking that meeting a little bit later today with the president. But for now, as we talk about Hamas's possible defeat, I am curious. Part of it really does have to do with the administrative control that Hamas has sustained in Gaza. So if you would, just talk to us a little bit about the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. How is the GHF doing, and is it undermining Hamas's ability to administer the Gaza Strip, as we've heard?
Yeah, I visited 2 of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation's aid distribution sites inside Gaza in the last 10 days. And to me, this could be a turning point in the conflict. As you kind of alluded to, depriving Hamas of the ability to control aid, which allows them, first of all, to gain financial, to gain funds for their terrorist operations. Secondly, to control the civilian population in Gaza in a way they couldn't do if they don't control the aid. GHF, I was going to say FDD, but I'm sure.
We're not on the ground there, not yet.
Not yet, but GHF has been doing remarkable work, and it's been extremely well received by the civilian population in Gaza. I must have spoken to at least 50 Gazan civilians collecting aid at each of the 2 distribution sites I visited. They were extremely grateful for what they're being given, and many of them said it's the first time they've received free aid since the war began. The rest of the time they've had to buy aid, which has been seized by Hamas and sold in local marketplaces. So very grateful to the GHF, and very grateful to the United States. Of course, they identify the GHF directly with the United States. And I heard chants like, "I love America, I love Trump," and from a lot of people there. And also, "I hate Hamas, kill Hamas." There's clearly a very strong mood against Hamas among the ordinary people in Gaza. Now, that doesn't necessarily translate into a significant uprising against Hamas, but I think it does tell the story. And the third thing that I saw in the GHF sites was, or heard about, was how most of the people told me they want to get out of Gaza. They see no future in Gaza. They want to leave. And one final point on it, I'm happy to take any other questions on the GHF, but one final point is we shouldn't forget that the 2 main opponents of the GHF are, 1, Hamas, for obvious reasons, and 2, the United Nations. Let that sink in. The enemies of this new aid distribution system, which is appreciated by the Gazans, are Hamas and the United Nations.
Enemies both. I will say that the chants that you heard about, we love America, we love Trump, we hate Hamas, if only I could hear those chants on American college campuses right now. I mean, really just remarkable to me that you're hearing that from the Gazans and that we hear this other garbage on American college campuses. But I think you're absolutely right about the importance of noting that it's really the corrupt NGOs that have benefited from the aid system for so long and that have worked hand in glove with Hamas for so long that they're the ones who've been sniping at GHF. They're the ones who've been taking the pot shots. And so I'm glad to hear that they're having some success. I wish them more success. I'm glad you had an opportunity to be able to go there, to witness it, and to be able to report back. I want to get back to this idea of a ceasefire because, we've heard that the United States is pushing Israel to either end the war permanently or perhaps enter into a 60-day ceasefire with the goal of eventually ending the war permanently in Gaza. I mean, let me ask you, if Hamas released the hostages, would that do it alone for you? Do you think that would be enough for Israel to say, okay, look, they've been through this for a year and a half. They've been fighting. They're exhausted. They were fighting on 7 fronts. They just went through this harrowing experience with Iran launching 500 ballistic missiles and 1,000 drones into Israeli airspace. I mean, you do get a sense that the Israeli public is tired. You get a sense that they are ready for a rest. I mean, maybe play this out for us. Does a temporary ceasefire do anything for us? Does the return of hostages do anything for us? Or do you really think that you need about another month or 3 months of fighting to finally end this? I mean, what's the logic as you think through this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm somewhat skeptical that Hamas is going to release all of the hostages. They're their only cards they've really got to play. They may release some if there is a deal, but they're not going to release all of them. I'd be very surprised if they do. And I don't think even if they did release all of the hostages, unlikely, I don't think that's the end of the story. I think Hamas still is not very powerful now. It's lacking in its main supporter, Iran. Now Iran is now, I think, to not destroyed, but to a large extent on its knees after its total humiliation in the 12-day war, and it is not in a position really to do very much for Hamas now. So I think Hamas is in a bad way, but has to be, I believe, completely defeated during this war. And I don't think I've spent a lot of time in Israel in the last month and in the last, the whole time pretty much since the 7th of October. I don't sense that the Israelis are ready to end this fight. I know there's division in Israel over Gaza specifically. There was absolutely no division in Israel during the 12-day war. They wanted to see Iran smashed to pieces, and they did see that. There is some division, but the division mainly revolves around the hostages. I don't think it represents exhaustion. Of course, all Israelis want the war to end as quickly as possible, but they also know how much of a threat Hamas presents to them. And so I think I would guess, certainly from the discussions I've had with Israelis from across the spectrum, they want to see this war ended with the defeat of Hamas, not just with the release of the hostages.
All right, we're going to have to wait and see. I do know that that pressure is building on Bibi, but I also know that his coalition is not necessarily eager to end this war, and neither is the IDF, I think, as you suggest. I do think they understand that they need to fully neutralize that threat before they go back to whatever normal once looked like in the Middle East. I'm having a hard time remembering that. Speaking of normal, though, what does a good day after plan look like to you? We hear a lot about day after plans. We know the Israelis don't want Hamas. We know they don't want the Palestinian Authority. We've heard about foreign actors like the UAE or Saudi Arabia. Now we're hearing about local players on the ground that can possibly do the job. In your view, and you've done this before, you're an expert in urban warfare and counterterrorism. What does this look like to you if it's going to be a success?
Well, I think in many ways, it has to be a combination of all those things. And I know the Israelis have been working on, shall we say, the day after, ever since this war began. People say there's no plan, there's no consideration. There is a lot of consideration, a lot of planning been going on. I don't say there's a firm plan yet, and it may not be possible to actually develop a firm plan until the day after begins. But I think the first thing I would say that has to happen, in my opinion, is that Israel has to maintain overall security control inside Gaza. It cannot allow, because even if Hamas is smashed up, there's something that's going to replace it. Something that, you know, there is going to be a successor to Hamas of some sort, and therefore the IDF cannot allow that to develop as it did before the 7th of October. So they have to maintain close security control of Gaza. I think the overall management of Gaza, the reconstruction, if it's going to take place, the day-to-day running of the Strip, is something that neither Israel, the Israeli government, nor the IDF actually want to take responsibility for, and I can understand absolutely why that is. And so I think, you know, probably the ideal would be some form of consortium of Arab states like the UAE, possibly Egypt, other Saudi Arabia, other countries to help finance and oversee the running of the Gaza Strip. And then ideally, the day-to-day control and management in detail of the Strip would best be done by Gazans themselves, if sufficient Gazans with enough authority can be found to actually take on that responsibility, who haven't been supporters of Hamas. So it's not a great answer to your question, but I think that's probably the ideal combination of layers of control of Gaza for the future.
Yeah, I mean, look, there is no great answer. I've heard some of the Israeli plans, and I've heard some of the outside plans, and I haven't been really bowled over by any of them. I mean, I think what I would agree with what you said up front, which is that you can't really create a day after scenario until the day after begins. And you need to have that defeat of Hamas to be able to inspire confidence in those that might even take over the Gaza Strip. If they still believe that Hamas is there and that Hamas has a significant hold on power, then it's going to be very hard to convince any of these actors that it's worth their while to put one foot on the ground, knowing that they could be killed, knowing that they could be targeted by Hamas. So I think I generally align with where you are, and I'm very curious to see where this thing all heads after the discussion between Bibi and Trump today. Last question before I let you go. You're a veteran of the British military. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit about how the British Navy has engaged the Houthis. I understand that they were actually exchanging fire with the Houthis yesterday. I know that they also have the British Air Force has been scrambling out of Cyprus at least last year to down Iranian drones. Haven't heard much about that lately. So how involved is the UK right now in this war in the Middle East? We just don't hear about it very much on this program.
Yeah, I was very encouraged last year to see the Royal Air Force taking a part in defending Israel against Iranian missiles and drones. That was encouraging indeed. But we haven't seen anything, to my knowledge, we haven't seen anything in the latest attack from Iran or against Iran and Iran's retaliation. We haven't seen anything to indicate that the British have been directly involved in supporting Israel, which is a disappointment. I know they deployed significant numbers of combat planes to Cyprus at the start of the 12-day war, but I don't think they were used, and I suspect the British government will be reluctant to use them in support of Israel. Maybe they were there in order to protect the British sovereign bases in Cyprus and Cyprus itself if that came under attack from Iran. But Britain, since the new government, the Labour government took over last year, Britain has taken a very different attitude towards Israel, and that includes imposing a partial arms embargo on Israel. It includes imposing sanctions on Israeli elected government ministers, and too much sniping from the sidelines against Israel. So I think we've got a government now that doesn't pay much attention to what should properly be its foreign policy objectives. Its foreign policy and its policy towards Israel is dictated much more by the mobs on the streets of London, by the huge number of Labour supporters who are vehemently opposed to Israel, and that those things are driving. Every week, sometimes every day, on the streets of London, on university campuses, we see a huge amount of anti-Israel hate and anti-Jew hate as well, by the way, and that's what's driving, I think, government policy. And it shouldn't be. It should recognise the threat that we face from the same jihadist attacks as Israel faces. And today actually is the 20th anniversary of the 7th of July bombings in London, 4 suicide bombing attacks, in which, by the way, Israel was extremely helpful in assisting our follow-up to those attacks. I was involved myself directly in the intelligence world then, and I know Israel was very, very useful to us. And we should take a leaf out of Israel's books and support Israel totally, strongly, and not do all this, as I mentioned, sniping from the sidelines when we're both facing the same threat. We should particularly, I think, be thankful to Israel for what it did to Iran. Now, the Iran problem is not over, we know that, but Iran, a nuclear-armed Iran, represented the same threat, or pretty much the same threat, to Europe in the longer term as it did to Israel and the Middle East in the shorter term. We should be very thankful to Israel for what it did.
Fully agree. All right, we're going to leave it there. I want to thank you, Colonel Richard Kemp, for joining us today on the FDD Morning Brief.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, here's what FDD has on tap for you today. My colleague Joe Truzman has a new piece in FDD's Long War Journal detailing Hamas's call for Yasser Abu Shabab, leader of the anti-Hamas Popular Forces militia, to surrender. Backed by Israel, the militia says it seeks to defend Palestinian people and safeguard aid distribution, with a potential ceasefire on the horizon and tensions between Hamas and the Popular Forces escalating. The future of Gaza hangs in the balance. FDD's Ruel Marcorrect has a new piece in the Dispatch examining Iran's nuclear infrastructure in the aftermath of that bruising 12-day war. The central question now, is this the end of the Islamic Republic, or will the regime recover or be replaced by some other Islamist power? That's all TBD, but for now, Ruel argues that Israel must rely on its deeply embedded intelligence capabilities, led by the Mossad, who are still there, by the way, to disrupt covert efforts by Tehran to rebuild its nuclear program. And yes, we know the Mossad is still there. Finally, FDD's Natalie Econo has a piece in the New York Sun on the renewed bipartisan interest in designating the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. Fully endorse that. Natalie emphasizes that as Washington turns its attention to the transnational Islamist movement, Qatar's longstanding support for this nasty network must not be ignored. All right, folks, stick a fork in it because we're done. If you want more super smart things to read, check out our website and take a scroll through our social media. Please do consider making that tax-deductible donation to FDD. You can always do that at fdd.org/invest. Tune in Wednesday for another riveting episode of the FDD Morning Brief. Until then, I'm Jonathan Schanzer, signing off for FDD.